Hey guys, so we are we're working towards finishing up The Girls Who Went Away. We are still in chapter 8. This is Susan 3's story. We are going to get started. I thought I might be pregnant. My period was late, so I called the doctor and made an appointment. I was very nervous. I was appalled when the nurse told me I had to get naked. I said, doesn't he only need to examine my bottom half? I figured I had plenty of time to tell my mother that my boyfriend and I would have time to make a plan. I'd been going out with my boyfriend for a couple of years. We met when we were freshmen in high school. On my 16th birthday, he gave me a beautiful pearl ring and asked if I would marry him after we graduated. I was crazy mad in love with him. I knew he loved me, so I wasn't too worried. The next morning, when he picked me up for school, I told him I was pregnant. He said, now what are we going to do? I said, we'll get married. He didn't say much. We never talked about it a whole lot. Later, he said, where are we going to live? And I said, well, we'll figure all that out. I'm sure our parents will help us. His parents were wonderful people. My parents were wonderful people. I couldn't see that they wouldn't want to help us. A few weeks later, my mother was sitting on the chair by the telephone, and she said to me, come sit on my lap, which wasn't uncommon for us. I sat on her lap, I put my arms around her neck, and she said, are you pregnant? I said, no, of course I'm not pregnant. She said, Susan, I checked your napkin. It wasn't soiled. Okay, so first of all, that's gross. Ew. Like, I'm not saying having a period is gross. I'm just saying, like, to go into the garbage can and check to see if your child has their period is gross. That's like crossing a line. You know what I'm saying? Ugh. Anyway. I had been pretending to have my period, and I would wrap up a pad and put it in the wastepaper basket in the bathroom. But the gig was up. I said, I'm so sorry. I really hope that we would have all this figured out by the time we told you and Daddy. So that night, Daddy came home and he said, don't worry, honey. This happens to a lot of people. He said, you two will be married and you'll live here with us. The next morning, when my boyfriend picked me up from school, I told him, and my father knew that he understood and he was not angry with us and that we can be married and live with them. Okay, so starting off with that, her parents sound very supportive. And that is what we need. We need more support and resources for bio parents. So, yes. All right, continuing on. The following weekend, my mother invited his mom to come to our house to have a little powwow. He just kept looking down. He couldn't look me in the face. Finally, he said, Susan, I love you, but I'm not going to marry you. I can't do this. I can't live with your father. He's a cop. I couldn't live with his rules. Later, my parents made me tell him I had miscarried. I think my father's biggest fear at this point was that he'd change his mind and come looking for me. So first of all, I think it's wrong that they forced her to tell the bio dad that she miscarried. I think everyone has a right to know what is happening with this baby, and the baby has a right to know where the bio parents are. Now, obviously, this was back in between the 40s and the 60s, but it's still an issue, right? This is still happening, and not a lot of bio fathers know the truth about what happened to that child, or even knew that the woman was pregnant, and they just put the baby up for adoption. I'm not saying it's every case, but I'm saying there's a lot of cases. And, you know, if it's a safety thing, I get it, but majority of the time it's not a safety thing, and it's a problem. All right, continuing on. Mom started making me new clothes to hide my weight gain. There was a new fashion called a tent dress, which was very convenient for me at the time. And that's what I wore to school. I don't know how many kids fell for the miscarriage. I worried that everyone knew I was pregnant and hiding it. I joined in nothing after school, none of the activities. I went to school and home. I couldn't wait for school to end. It was such a stressful thing, especially during the months I had morning sickness. Mom used to pack me saltines so that if I started to feel nauseous, I could sneak one during class. I stayed at home until July 8th. Then I was sent to St. Mary's Home for Unwed Mothers. I woke up in labor on September 16th. Sister walked me over to St. Margaret's Hospital and placed me in the care of a nurse. I never saw her again. She didn't touch me. There was no compassion, no feeling. And boy, did I need some compassion at that point. I was so afraid. As much as they gave us medical care, they didn't give us much emotional support, or even acknowledge as to what labor and delivery was going to be like. The nurse who took care of me for the first few hours was an older woman, and she was very distant. When they came to prep me, I had no idea they were going to shave me. I was like, "You're going to shave me where?" I was appalled. I was so embarrassed. As I lay in the room by myself, I began to cry. I don't know why I cried. I probably cried for some reason than I could even absorb at the time. I was afraid of what was happening to my body. I was afraid that this was the end of my pregnancy, and I wasn't going to be with my baby anymore. After my daughter was born, they wrapped her up a bit. They kind of held her close enough that I could get a good look at her, but not close enough that I could have reached out. So that happened with me as well. Granted, I had an emergency C-section, so they woke me up because I was put under for my C-section, just enough to see his face, and then they put me back under, and then I wasn't allowed to hold him for hours later. But yeah, like they do that. Now, granted, I took my son home. You know, I'm a single parent, but just the thought of not being able to hold your baby and have that initial contact at first is so terrifying and frustrating. And all I wanted to do as soon as I fully woke up, or I was even groggy at the time, you know, in recovery, and I just wanted to make sure he was okay. So I sent my parents to the nursery to make sure he was good. Like, I made sure that my dad followed him into the nursery so that he was good, because I was so afraid. And, like, he's still the first biological person I have met that is related to me, you know, in person, right? But fearing that you're going to lose your child, especially as an adoptee, having lost your biological family is such, it really wakes you up when you're going through stuff. It's hard. Like, I will be honest, it's hard. Anyway, continuing on. She was so beautiful. The next thing I needed after seeing my daughter was to hear the sound of my mother's voice. I asked the nurse if I could call home. She wheeled me out in the hall and dialed a number. When my mother answered, I could tell I'd woken her. It was 2 a.m. All I could say to her was, "I can come home now." She started to cry, and of course, I cried right alongside with her, and I told her a little bit about my delivery and my baby, and she promised she'd come up and see me in the morning. I don't even remember my mother coming that first morning. I have no recollection of her being there. All I remember is when the nurse brought Madeline to me. Oh, I love the spelling of the name. It's Madeline, but it's Madeline. It's cute though. Anyway, I put her in my lap and I undressed her and checked her from head to toe. She was so soft. I was amazed by the sight of her. Once the nurse left, I pushed aside my nightgown and I laid Madeline against me. I covered us with a sheet. I just wanted to make the most of every minute I had. I remember how soft and smooth her skin was, and her hair was tickling my chin. When the nurse came back, she brought cotton balls and warm water, and we bathed her. I remember laughing. It was the happiest day I had in the 12 weeks I was away, and the morning I spent with the nurse learning to care for Madeline. We did that every day for 8 days. On the last day, I fed her and rocked her and bathed her, and I promised to her that I would find her when she turned 21. My father always said that I was very determined, and I guess I proved it to myself then, because I knew I would find her. I knew that someday we would meet again. When we left St. Mary's that day, I knew my life had been changed forever. I wasn't the same fun girl I had been. Going back to high school was very hard. I was very distracted. My grades suffered. I couldn't concentrate on the things my friends were saying or the things going on around me. Most of the talk seemed trivial to me. I thought about Madeline constantly. I was trying to be so brave for my parents, and I was trying to keep up with the facade. Everyone told me I would feel fine, that I should just go back to school and be a teenager, go to the football games and parties. And it just hit me that I'd never be the same. I would never be like the other girls. 2 days after I returned home, I went back to see the priest to sign the final relinquishment papers. My aunt went with me. We went to the priest's office, and he was very nonchalant, very cavalier about the whole thing. Oh, how are you doing? How's school? I said, well, I haven't returned yet, Oh, feeling good? You look wonderful. You'll be back with your friends. Things will be good. Yes, Father. Yes, Father. He hands me a sheet of paper. None of the black lines were filled in with my name or with Madeline Jean's name or the date of birth. Nothing. It was completely blank. He pointed to a line, and he said, sign here. My aunt signed as a witness. I was only 17, and I knew that was wrong. I knew those lines should have been filled in. I said, shouldn't this be filled in? It just wasn't the standard form with said child, ... said child. I remember feeling so hurt. My baby has a name. My daughter has a name. Her name is Madeline Jean. So pausing there for a quick moment, because speaking of names, we're going to have a discussion about names eventually. I have been talking about this on my TikTok, not the one with this name, but my other one. And there's other adoptees that are speaking on it about the name change. Changing a child's name is... Okay, look, I know there's controversy even with amongst adoptees, but a lot of adoptees feel like their identity is stolen, not just with the name, but with a lot of things. And, if you just change the child's name just because, oh, well, I want a baby and they're a blank slate, it's a problem, right? And if it's a safety issue, I get it, but the baby has a name. Try to keep it. Try to understand, All right, continuing on. But my feelings weren't of any of their concern. Their business was to get my signature on that line, and that's how I signed my baby away, on a blank sheet of paper. The social worker sent me those papers after I found Madeline. She photo-stated everything, and the paper was there. It was exactly as I remembered it. My name on a blank sheet of paper. Not the least bit of legal. Of course it's not. They don't care. They don't care about bio families, and they don't care about the adoptees. They just want to sell the idea of a family to these adoptive parents under the idea of saviorism and building a family. And it's really frustrating because 99% of these bio parents want to raise their baby. I'm not saying that some temporary placement might be needed, because yes, that happens, but we are safer with our bio family statistically, right? And it's a problem. It's a problem that they do this. They don't care about humans. They don't. Okay. Sorry. Ranting here. I made up my mind that I would find a boy that my father and mother approved of, and I would marry him and have his babies. That was my new mission. By Thanksgiving, I found that boy. I knew exactly who I was going after. There was this boy that I had become friends with as a sophomore. He and I talked about everything. He was on the football team. He was a starting player. He was tall, dark, and very handsome. The greatest guy ever. And I was going to marry him. We spent the rest of our senior year together. He was wonderful to me. He treated me like the lady I pretended to be. I always felt bad that I didn't tell him what I had just been through. I let him believe I was your normal average teenager, that I was a good girl. We went to the senior prom together. I loved being with him. He made me feel the way I thought I should feel. I didn't love him, not even in the slightest. I still love the father of my baby. After we graduated from high school, my new boyfriend asked me to marry him, and I said yes, even though I knew I didn't love him. I didn't know if I could ever grow to love him, but I hoped I could. My reasoning was, now that we're engaged, I'll fall in love with him. Well, that never happened. Our wedding was planned, and we were married the following September in 1970. And as the wedding date neared, I thought, I'll fall in love with him once we're married. I wasn't going to turn back. I was going to be married because he was going to give me the babies I wanted so much. I figured once I have this baby, I will love him. I will fall in love with him then. We had 2 children. We had our first girl in 1973 and our second in 1976. I still didn't fall in love with him. Ooh, that is rough. You know, a lot of couples stay together because of children, or the pressure of society, and, you know, granted, this was, 40 plus years, 50 years ago, right? Some of this stuff still happens, right? And I want to make it clear that, you should be authentic to yourself, whether you're an adoptee or not. But you should marry for love. And it's okay to be child-free. It's okay to be single for as long as you need. It's okay to not conform to the society's standards, right? And if you're in a relationship where you don't feel there's love and you feel like you're only staying because of the kids, those kids can feel it. Those kids can absolutely feel it. And yes, divorce is sad and hard, but sometimes it is absolutely necessary, okay? So while I absolutely think that, couples therapy is therapeutic and can be helpful, divorce can be inevitable. And sometimes people work out better apart than they do together, okay? So don't stay in a relationship that you feel you're stuck in, where you feel like you don't love someone or you feel unloved just because you have a child with them, all right? I want to make that clear. All right, moving on. I refused to go to work. There was no way, not any chance, I would ever leave my children in daycare or with anyone else. In 1978, when my second daughter was 2, the indifference that I felt towards my husband was wearing on me. It was very difficult to get into bed with a man you don't love. I felt like I wasn't being fair to myself, and more importantly, to him. I felt that he needed a wife who could love him and give him all the wonderful things he gave me that I couldn't give back. I reached the point in my life where I didn't like myself for pretending. It seemed my whole life I pretended. I pretended I didn't have a child. I pretended I loved this man. My daughters were the only true happiness in my life. I finally told my husband in October of 1978 how I felt. I came clean. He was crushed. All he kept saying to me was, "This whole thing has been a lie." I couldn't even help him by saying that it wasn't, because it was. That day he moved out. I went upstairs to tell my parents. We owned a 2-family home with them. At that point in my life, I had become such a good actress that even my parents, who lived in the same house as us, didn't know I was unhappy. I was able to hide any emotion I felt to suit my purpose. My husband left right after New Year's. The relief I felt was beyond words. I felt happy that I didn't have to pretend to this man or to anyone else that I was in love with him. I still loved Madeline's father. I thought about him every day. I thought about Madeline, and I thought about her every single day. No matter where I was with all the girls, I was looking for Madeline, always searching for a little face that looked like me or my daughters. There were times I'd be caught staring at little girls, like at swimming lessons or brownies or dancing school. I would notice that their mothers were watching their children. I felt so pathetic. Even the sister told me that Madeline had been given to a Boston physician and his wife. I never believed her. I always felt in my heart that she had been given to a family in Fall River, which is about 15 miles from here. I would go to Fall River knitting mills. It was always full of kids and parents shopping for school sweaters. Once I got married, I made that my Christmas pilgrimage. Santa Claus would be giving out balloons and candy canes. I would go all by myself and sit on those benches and watch the children, looking for a little girl. Once my husband left, I was broke. I wouldn't accept any money from him. I went on welfare. It helped, but it was still hardly enough. So I got a job working in a nightclub as a cocktail waitress. I would work 8 to 2 on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And my mother, because she lived upstairs, would watch the girls. There was a disc jockey there that I was very attracted to. I'd probably gone out with him for 2 months when I knew how strongly I felt, how much I loved him. It had been 14 or 15 years, and I finally wasn't thinking of Madeline's father. I thought, before I get any more involved with this guy, he has to know about my daughter. So I told him the story of Madeline, and he looked at me and said, well, if she's your daughter, why wouldn't I love her too? And that is a supportive partner, okay? Like, let's be clear about that. Yes. Okay. Well, where was I? We were married in 1982. My daughters were my bridesmaids. They were 6 and 8. I still hadn't told the girls about Madeline, and I knew I had to. Every time I thought about it, it made me sick. I've been quite ill for most of my life from the time of my relinquish: pneumonia, urinary tract infections, migraines, nightmares, depression, and anxiety, but it was never so bad as it was after I had my 4th daughter in 1984. I was 33, and the pain and longing for Madeline just came rushing back at me after having my last child. I got sick with pneumonia shortly after her birth. I thought my depression might be due to my feeling so lousy at the time. My pneumonia lasted about 16 weeks. I was in and out of the hospital. They didn't know what was wrong with me because I didn't have temperatures. I had a lung biopsy, and my pulmonologist was absolutely baffled. He even wrote up my case for a medical association meeting. He sent me to Boston, and the doctors there couldn't find anything wrong with me. Years later, I received a post from one of my birth mother groups that explained post-traumatic stress. I had all the classic symptoms. Okay, we kind of touched about this, but mental health takes a toll on our bodies, right? And a lot of birth moms and adoptees are chronically ill because of the stress, right? It's not just post-traumatic stress disorder. We really should be diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, so CPTSD, and often we're not. So they often miss a lot of the issues because they ignore the adoption, or they're not asking the right questions, right? So, like, for example, I have lupus and fibro, which totally true, but a lot of the symptoms are also correlated with CPTSD, right? And, you know, we get diagnosed with other issues, which is good. You know, we need help. It's just we don't take the correlation between mental health and our physical health and our emotional health seriously, or like that there's a correlation, right? That your mental health affects your physical health. And we have to talk about that. We need to, like, how do I express what I'm trying to say? We have to have more understanding and about that, right? We have to recognize that. Now, some people do, absolutely, but it's also a problem with doctors, because we find that a lot of doctors don't take chronic illness seriously as it is, not even with that mental health aspect. And that is a huge issue. Anyway, continuing on. Madeline's 21st birthday was coming up, and my first daughter from my marriage was going to be 16. I knew that when she turned 16, I would tell her about Madeline. She was very mature and wise for her age. I knew she'd have some good advice as to how to tell her younger sister, who were 14 and 5, about their sister. I couldn't wait for the day to come. 2 weeks before her 16th birthday, she was diagnosed with leukemia. Oh my God. Whew, that's tough. She died 5 months later. So losing a child it's heartbreaking. Unless you've lived through it, it's, you can't understand that grief, right? Now, I never lost a child. I'm going to be honest with you. I have one and never lost a child. I have, however, lost a cousin at the age of 2. She was 2. I was probably around my son's age. So I was probably around 10 or 11. And she passed from leukemia. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking watching your child battle something that it shouldn't affect anyone, let alone a child, right? So anyway, we're going to continue on, because I don't really have the words to, describe what it's like. She died 5 months later. My grief was so great. I felt God had punished me for giving my first baby away. I didn't know what to do. The night she died, we drove home. I didn't know how I was going to get up the next morning. I had lost 2 daughters. So, as I like to say, adoption is a living death, right? Because the child is out there somewhere, and you don't know how they are doing. You don't know how they are feeling. A lot of adoptees do mask even if they're in reunion or have an open adoption. But the only way to truly grieve, a finality, right, is through actual death. And I know that's painful to say. And like I said, I don't think any child should die before their parents, right? And I truly do, wish Susan my whole heart and sympathy for what she's gone through. But for her, it is like a second death, right? She doesn't know where her first daughter is. Okay, sorry. I'm on a... Whew. Let's continue on. I had 2 more, and I wondered how long it would be before I lost them. I didn't know how I was going to face the girls and my parents when I got home. I had nothing to say to them. I was totally empty. We pulled into the driveway, and it was loaded with cars. My brothers were there. My godparents were there. My cousins were there. And I didn't want to get out of the car because I couldn't face them. When I opened the door and my daughters came running to me, I knew exactly why I was going to get up in the morning. I was going to get up for those 2 girls. I never felt so loved. The contrast between losing this daughter and losing Madeline was so different. Why could my parents and family see that I needed comforting after my daughter's death and not see that I needed it after the relinquishment of Madeline? And that's why we got to talk about this. Birth moms need support, not just to be able to raise their children, right? Or have that capability, but when they are, choosing, and I say that lightly, choosing to place their child, or it's forced, they still need support. It still messes with their mental health. And it's frustrating as an adoptee because, while I try to channel my page to uplift our voices because we aren't heard as much, birth moms need recognition too. They really do. And hearing birth mom stories are hard, even for adoptees like myself. But I think it's just as vital to hear their side, to hear their emotions, to hear all perspectives, right? And I say that because adoptive parents are heard. They're heard the loudest. Usually they're misinformation. Usually in terms of information they're spreading is wrong, but they are heard the loudest, and it's usually entitlement, and adoptees need to be heard. But I also want to bring a little bit of that birth parent perspective in because they deserve to be heard too, and adoptees can absolutely be in all three positions, right? Or in two positions, right? There are adoptees who also adopt. There are adoptees who are also birth parents. So, those are unique perspectives. It's definitely a struggle. So, all right. My search was put on an indefinite hold. I was emotionally unstable. Again, I received no counseling. I figured I was strong enough. My illnesses became worse. The pneumonia, the urinary tract infections, the nightmares. The nightmares were the worst part. I call it my running nightmare. I was always running, sometimes in the street of the neighborhood where I grew up, and sometimes on a beach. Always running after a little girl in a diaper. And I could never catch her because there was a man running after me. He would always catch me before I could catch the little girl. And I would try so hard to hit him and shove him away, but my arms were weighted down. I couldn't raise them. I would try to shoot to the child to stop, but when I opened my mouth, no sound would come out. This had been happening for 28 years. I had to do something. I had to find this child. It was killing me, emotionally and physically. At some point, I called Catholic Charities and told the woman there that I needed to contact Madeline because her sister had died of leukemia, and I wanted her to know that if she or any of her children ever got sick, they would have an entire family of bone marrow donors available to them. And the reply I got from the social work was, "Do Madeline and your other daughter share the same father?" I said no. She said, "Is leukemia hereditary on your side of the family?" And I said no. "Then chances of Madeline having leukemia are slim." I was very angry. Who made her the master of all medical likelihood? What gave her the right to decide that? She's right. She's right on that. Mama Bear is right on that. Okay. I searched the internet for 1 year in secret. I searched every day, every adoption list. I registered in every site I could find. I joined the International Soundex Reunion Registry. Then after 1 year of searching, I knew I had to come out of this birth mother closet and start making some noise, or I'd never find my child. First, I told my husband, then the girls, that I was searching. They were very happy for me. I told my brothers, told my parents, and I didn't receive one negative response. Everyone was happy for me. My parents couldn't believe it because I had always told them I'd never look for her. I didn't want them to think that everything they went through was all in vain. All the secrets sending me away just for me to find her in the end. I always try to protect my parents. They didn't blink an eye. They encouraged me every step of the way. It was such a wonderful feeling to be able to tell people I gave up a child and I'm looking for her. I am her birth mother. I haven't had a migraine since I found her. I did, however, finally seek the counseling that I needed. Not only for my relinquishment for her, but my daughter's death. My husband found a very awesome lady to help me. She said, before you grieve your daughter's death properly, you have to grieve the loss of Madeline. I finally feel peace. My mother and I had never spoken about my relinquishment, even when I was searching and after I found Madeline. It had been a taboo subject, and it wasn't until after my dad's death a couple of years ago that my mother was able to talk to me about her decision. At first, she tried to tell me that she never felt guilty because it was in my best interest. All I could say was to her is, if you never felt guilty, I'm disappointed in you. Because I could never understand how a kind and caring mother like my mother, could give away a grandchild and not feel guilty. I think those words made her realize that she wasn't being honest with herself. All right, I'm going to pause there for a moment. So, I never got to meet my grandparents. They died before I was back in reunion with my birth mom. But what I was told by my birth mom, as well as both my uncles, one who has since passed on her side, was that my grandparents, while they might not have been the best parents or grandparents, they felt incredibly guilty that my birth mom felt unsafe to tell them everything that was happening so that I could stay with her. Now, granted, there was a religious aspect because my birth mom is Mormon, but I just want to note that when you give up a child for adoption, or if you're an adoptive parent listening, right? When you're adopting, adoption doesn't just affect the adoptee and the birth parent, right? It affects everyone in the family. And it is so important to understand that and to support the adoptee or the birth mom, right? We have to do better. All right, continuing on. Through counseling, I finally realized that my feelings count because I never thought they did. When you give up a baby, you don't feel you deserve much of anything, let alone happiness. After those conversations with my mother, it was the first time she told me she was sorry she gave my baby away. She hugged me, and she told me she loved me. I know she was being honest. I know she really meant it. And the healing that took place within me with just those words, I'm sorry. Having to give my daughter away made me realize how precious life is, and that it can be taken from you, and that you're powerless to stop it. I was powerless because I was 17 and unmarried. Society and my church and my parents felt that was the right decision for me. I had no voice. I made sure that I spent every day with my girls. When my daughter died, I was so happy that I spent every day of her 16 years with her. I cherish those memories. And now that I have Madeline back, we are making memories. I can't take back the 30 years I lost with her. They're gone forever. I can either choose to sit and dwell on that, or I can just accept that they're gone and enjoy what I have now. And I have a lot. I have been asked the question, what is worse, adoption or death? Before I found Madeline, I thought adoption was worse because I knew where my second daughter was. She was in heaven. But I still worried about Madeline and where she was. After I found Madeline, I know death is worse because I'll never see my second daughter again. Okay, so going back to the living death portion, I just want to note that Susan is very lucky to have reunited with her birth mom, or with her daughter, and Madeline in that aspect. Unfortunately, many adoptees and birth moms don't get to reunite, right? And it's hard to talk about the statistics because it's true, but I'm going to reiterate them as much as I can when necessary because it's important to note, right? Adoptees are 8 times more likely to be abused and unalived by non-biological parents, aka adoptive parents, right? We are 4.7 times more likely to turn to substance abuse, 4 times more likely to unalive ourselves, and we are rehomed 7 out of 10 times. The rate of our death for adoptees is much higher than anyone else in the population. Kept people, veterans, anyone else. It is extremely dangerous. So most adoptees and birth parents don't get that opportunity. Now, when they do, it's not always perfect by any means, but I wouldn't say one is worse than the other. I mean, it's frustrating, right? Because I'm coming from the adoptee experience, right? I didn't lose a child, so I can't compare that death. You know, I value her opinion because she has that perspective. But not many adoptees are that lucky, right? Or birth parents are that lucky to have that reunion. A lot of adoptees find their birth parents and they're gone. So it's definitely hard, but there's something about the finality of death where you can have that final grievance and you know where they are. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I'm not saying that. I don't think it's a fair comparison in terms of trauma. They're two very different traumas, but they almost intertwine at some points. I hope that makes sense. You know, what I'm trying to say is that, like, we all lose someone at some point, right? And so that understanding of grief is going to happen. So when death is final, you generally get that support. But with adoption, it's completely the opposite. Not only as a birth parent, but as an adoptee. And it's extremely frustrating. Extremely frustrating. Anyway, last part of this chapter. The lack of counseling at the home for unwed mothers was a mistake. Many of us had bad marriages. Many of us married men for the same reason I married mine. Just to have a baby we could keep. That's not fair to anyone. It's not fair to the husband. It's not fair to the children. My girls were separated from their father because of me. The consequences are far-reaching. What I did was wrong, but I did it to survive. The only way I know I could get up again was if I had more children. Little did I know back then that none of the children I had after, would ever replace Madeline. So yeah, I mean, on that note, you know, I'm going to try to catch up with, with this book as much as possible. But you can't replace that child, that first child, the biological child, none of that. So, like, if you're an adoptive parent and you're wanting to adopt because you feel like you can't build a family in any other way, whether it's whether you feel like it's a saviorism or it's because of health reasons, just understand that you're never going to replace that feeling of having a biological child and raising them, okay? So a lot of infertile couples or a lot of LGBTQ couples, excuse me, feel, and I'm not just saying it's them, I'm just saying majority of them, right, feel that adoption is their only way or their last resort to building a family. And they're not being able to grieve their loss of a biological child. And they're using it as like a Band-Aid. And that child can feel it. So just like you're grieving that loss or that you didn't have that chance, the birth mom is also grieving, right? And then the adoptee is also grieving. So we're all grieving for different reasons, but then we're all kind of like being used at the same time. And so it's extremely frustrating to be voiceless, like Susan said. She felt like she didn't have a voice. The adoptees have zero say. We have zero voice as children or as babies, right? We're nonverbal at the time, right? To be put into these situations that are actually not in our best interest. So making that clear, I'm going to finish up this book as quickly as possible. We're going to continue on with the psychology of adoption. I am sorry that I am far behind. Things have come up, but I'm going to get on it as quickly as possible. Stay tuned, and thank you for listening.